Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and yeah. First of all, I still hate ampersands. And this is Legends and Lattes, which is the first book of the duology that ended with the Bookshops and Bonedust. That is, Travis Baldree wrote this first and then wrote the second book, which was a prequel to this one, and it avoided the pitfall of the prequel that you get when you have sort of an explained backstory. That is, people complain about the issue of Star Wars and the prequel trilogy being that everybody knew that Anakin was Obi-Wan's student, and we knew that they were good friends, and we knew that Anakin eventually fell and became Darth Vader. So going into the prequel trilogy, you already knew where it was going, you just didn't know how you were going to get there, or how awful the movies would be. Though I understand that this is a somewhat more complicated argument these days than it was when those movies first came out and everybody was horrified by how terrible the acting was. That's not an argument I'm going to get into because I never had the patience to watch them to begin with. So the thing is, though, that in the sequel to this that I read previously, this book doesn't explain how Viv, that is the orc on the cover here, the green chick, if you don't know anything about World of Warcraft stuff, because this is, as I keep saying in my summaries, it feels very like World of Warcraft. I've never played WoW. I haven't. But you look at the ads, you look at the characters, you look at the shape of things, it has that feeling. It has that specific high fantasy action game feeling. Is all I can say. So, anyways, so you have this book, and it starts with a mercenary who has decided to hang up her sword, and she decides that she's going to enter this particular city that she apparently did some research picking the right city for it, and she's going to open a coffee shop. Now, this is a high fantasy, semi-medieval sort of world, so this is doing that thing where you have a medieval world, but everyone in it is really, really, really modern. Now, granted, there's always that line that you have to walk when writing period fantasy or period history rather, which is that people are still people, and so people still interacted like people. We are all modern humans, and the ancient Greeks were modern humans, and people in the Middle Ages were modern humans, and so they all did interact with each other like modern humans. But the fact is, you have certain social mores and certain social restrictions and how you do things that affect these interactions. Such as, limitations in the medieval period about women not being able to own a business without the assistance of a man to sort of get them the appropriate licensing to own businesses, and all those kinds of things. So you have that very, very modern thing where you have, first of all, a woman warrior, because this orc is, well, she's a mercenary. I'm not sure warrior is really the term you should use for mercenary soldiers, but, whatever. She's, somebody who goes around whacking stuff with a sword. And that's not typical women's medieval fare, putting aside the rare Joan of Arc or no. So the other thing is, of course, coffee shops have existed for a donkey's age. Coffee shops go way back. But the coffee shop in the modern idiom does not, in fact, go way back. In point of fact, a very long time ago, at the turn of the last century, in fact, And further back, coffee shops were not quite houses of ill repute, but they were not places where a nice lady would be seen. Today a coffee shop is a place where people get together and they sit down and they talk and they drink coffee and they go on dates or they study for exams or whatever. But they were a public house in which you had only met and which was sometimes a little bit on the morally skeevy edge of things, that it wasn't a nice place. But what she's basically setting up is the modern coffee shop, a artisanal, individual, single person owned Starbucksy coffee shop. It's obviously not a Starbucks. This is, a single person's coffee, but it's that idiom of coffee shop, which that's a somewhat more recent phenomenon in that form, but that's what she's setting it up. And so you have that. And you have her also introducing people to coffee. Because I admit that this introducing people to coffee or chocolate or pick your favorite awesome food thing is one of those weird things that I think is kind of like a culinary power fantasy, because there's practically nobody left in the world who anyone can introduce to coffee or chocolate. But that fantasy of being able to go back in time to 1500 to 1492, I suppose, to be the person who brings cocoa beans back to Europe and says, here, you guys try this stuff. That's a huge thing. And, just the idea of being able to give adults that experience, because of course, yes, you can be the first person to introduce a small child to chocolate or whatever, but introducing a small child to something is, well, it doesn't mean as much in the introduction thing, because to kids, everything is new. And so, you can equally be the first person to introduce a small child to Tang or grape Kool-Aid, and they'll be just as impressed because it'll be just as new to them. But so there's this weird culinary wish fulfillment thing happening with this concept of this medieval orc warrior person who decides to start a coffee shop and gets to introduce an entire city to coffee. But that's what she sets out to do. And so a lot of this book is just about somebody starting a business, and in particular starting a food business, that, those first things that happen, especially when you don't know anything about a business, that, she was kind of like a kid with a lemonade stand where you say, I will have lemonade, and I will offer lemonade, and people will pay me $0.25 for my cup of lemonade, and I will have a business. And she isn't really thinking beyond that, as, her soon-to-be partner starts to, whose name I never remember, because I don't remember names, that her partner, who is the lady with the tail on the front cover, that one sort of helps her with organizing things, with saying, here, you need to have some decorations, here, you need to do, things in the building, and they wind up hiring a baker, and, you have this whole thing, and then in the background, you have what starts out. And in this way, this is like the last book where, it starts out with the sellsword hanging up her sword and shield, and she's going to open a coffee shop. And then suddenly you get an introduction of the local mafia who are going to try to run a protection scheme. The old thing. Boy, it would be a tragedy if your building caught fire. Pay us money. And And she's planning to say no because she is very large and very muscular and has a big sword, and if they come at her, she can, whack them all with the sword, except, of course, people point out that you have to go shopping sometime, and if you are out shopping, you're not in the building, and if you're not in the building, they can set fire to it. And so that's a problem until she reaches a truce with the local mafiosa. Not mafioso, mind. It's a woman. But the intriguing thing about that, of course, is that it starts out like it's going to be a fight with the mafia, and then it isn't. It just kind of goes away. And there's a weird sort of let down sense in that because, you were sort of looking to have the mafiosa, maybe not the local gang, to maybe not run a protection racket. But no, she just bribes them with baked goods and they go away, I guess. It's a thing. And then her former, friends from the, mercenary group that she'd been with show up, and one of them is a jerk, and so he does things and sets fire to the... And the whole thing is... It's just sort of a lot of misadventures, and the interesting thing, of course, is that this is sort of a very real slice of life in a high fantasy setting thing. And I feel a little bit like, in this case, the magic is almost a cheat for not having to figure out how to avoid having the police come in and dust for fingerprints and avoid having to deal with how the mafia actually work in the real world, because this is a fantasy world. So if you want to have somebody decide that they won't, put the screws to you to get you to pay protection money because you give them baked goods, you can do that in a way that you can't if it were Tony Soprano. It's just, these are interesting books. I think, you have this cover quote by Shannon Maguire, "It's sweet, beautiful, and most of all kind." That's the thing about this book, is it is very gentle. This is a read. It's a very fan-fiction-y read, to be honest. It's got that very strong quality of something that nobody plans to have bad things, no bad things are going to happen to anyone who isn't a bad person, and everybody's going to come out fine, and everybody's going to get a happy ending, and the romance is all going to work out, it works out fine. There's a bit of, distance and so on caused by sheer undiluted obliviousness, but the romance works out fine, and it's all fine. But that said, this is not a deep book. This is a fun book. This is a reading on the beach during vacation kind of book. This is something that is really easy and really fast and fun. It's definitely fun. But I don't recommend it to anybody who's going to go on long rants about how I need deep character moments and lots of world-building lore, because this is not that. If you want to do world-building lore, you can work backwards from what is in this book and build lore out of it, but it seems like it would probably not be worth the effort. Anyway, yeah, it's a good time. So I recommend it to people who read things because it's a good time and they don't really want to read anything that's hard or serious or meant to be anything other than a good time. So yeah, I think that's everything I have to say, other than the fact that I still hate ampersands. And yeah, the bonus prequel story is kind of just like an immediate prequel and is fun. It's okay. Not really worth any sort of extra thing. Anyways, yeah, that's everything, and I will see you all next week.